And welcome to another episode of G220 Radio. This is Ricky Gantz along with Mike Miller. And again, this is G220 Radio, episode number 485. We're going to be talking about the Southern Baptist Convention 2021 today. Mike, how we doing, man? How's this week been for you?
It's been pretty good. It's a big week. Just some dealing with stuff kind of with it. So, some medical issues, so hopefully it should get cleared up this week. That's the hope, but you never know. I thought this was going to be over with 3 weeks ago, and here I am almost a month. So, which is why I couldn't go to the convention. So I'm kind of excited to get hear some other stuff from what happened.
Yeah, we're going to cover that tonight. We're going to talk about how does the Southern Baptist Convention work? I think there's a lot of misunderstandings from it, as you know, me and Mike have talked about, and I've talked with our guests before the program. I'm kind of new to the Southern Baptist Convention. Like I'm in a Southern Baptist church. It's the second one I've been in. I've talked with the pastor a little bit more about Southern Baptist working than in the previous church that I was in that happened to be Southern Baptist. And so I think, though, sometimes people have a misunderstanding of what it means to be Southern Baptist. They think it's this top-down denomination. And so I kind of want to talk about some of those things here today and get some more clarity on that, and maybe be helpful to those who are tuning in that are just wondering, what is all this convention talk about? Because it's been in the news a lot, and not just Christian news. It's been in the worldly news. A lot of stories being done on what was going on over the last week at the Southern Baptist Convention. So we're going to bring on our guest. We have Pastor Clay Hall. He's been on the program with us before. Pastor Hall, welcome to the show again. And our first timer here.
Good to see you.
Yeah, glad to have you here. And the first timer for us here on G220 Radio is Pastor Daryl Cornett. He is also with us on the show. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Yeah. And so, Pastor Daryl, since this is your first time with us, why don't you go ahead first and share a little bit with the listeners about yourself?
Sure. I am a native Kentuckian. I was born in the eastern part of the state, a small little town called Hazard. Give a shout out to Hazard, Kentucky. But I grew up in Lexington. Saw my formative years there. Grew up and was saved, baptized in an independent Baptist church, a little small church there in Lexington. Got introduced to Southern Baptist life later in life when I started dating a Southern Baptist girl. Went to a Southern Baptist college and was hooked ever since. And went to Southern Seminary and graduated there a couple times, and did a little teaching there in Lexington. And but then in 2000, headed to Memphis, where I got to teach at Mid-America Seminary for 8 years. All of the church history classes that everyone was just dying to take. And then in 2008, came back to Kentucky, went back to Hazard, actually the place that I was born, pastored a church there for 10 years. And just recently, 2.5 years ago, moved to Central North Carolina. So I'm the pastor, lead pastor at Aberdeen First Baptist in Aberdeen, North Carolina, which is probably an hour, just a little over an hour southwest of Raleigh area.
Wonderful, wonderful. Praise the Lord for what the Lord is doing in your life and moving you to teach and pastor in these different areas. And what a joy that is. What a very, trying to think of the right wording. It's a blessing to hold a position of pastoring, being a shepherd of God's people in a church. It's also a very strenuous job, I'm sure, at times. And so we thank you for your work in shepherding God's people where he has you. Pastor Clay Hall, again, you've been on the program before, but in case someone's tuning in for the first time that has not heard about you, why don't you share a little bit about yourself as well?
Sure. I am pastoring in Paducah, Kentucky since January, and it's a small replant that God is just really blessing, and just glad to be here, man. God's doing a great work, and so glad to be on the show again. Well,
again, we are glad to have you as well, and we thank you for the work that the Lord is doing in your life as a shepherd of his people where he has you as well. Mike, as we get into this, we kind of were talking about this in the beginning, as in the intro here, some things that maybe people don't understand about the SBC. I hear it a lot. Me and my wife were just talking about this earlier, that there are many people that think it's a denomination. And I was trying to even wrap my head around this, and pastors, you can jump in too whenever you feel, you want to jump in. And I was trying to wrap my head around this because you hear people say quite often, well, I'm Southern Baptist. So, but yet the convention is a bunch of churches coming together, but yet is it still a denomination, so to speak, or not a denomination? Why don't we kind of talk about that a little bit?
So obviously a lot of people use it in the term denomination. It's nice and easy to do it that way. But as you kind of alluded to, the Southern Baptist Convention is not technically a denomination. It's an association, a gathering of churches coming together to pool their money together to fund mission, education, and other things as they've gone away, as they've grown and found needs. So that's the main thing. And so what this plays out and how this plays out is that the churches, as a Baptist church, has autonomy. It's kind of fundamental of Baptist history that the church is autonomous. That's why you even have kind of the independent Baptist churches. That's kind of where you get it, that a church is autonomous and they choose to give money to the cooperative program, which funds the Southern Baptist Convention. In a real sense, the SBC only exists for 2 days, the 2 days of the convention. And so to think about it in that, it is different because it's different than a Presbyterian denomination where like a presbytery owns the building that a church meets in. The church doesn't own it. The presbytery do. That's not a thing in Southern Baptists. The General Assembly can kind of lay down rules that churches must obey. They have courts to try errant preachers. This isn't part of Southern Baptist because the local church is the foundation, and then the convention helps all of these 1,400 churches to train their pastors to fully fund missionaries, both local, kind of in our continent and abroad, and also in some sense fund Lifeway for resources, Guidestone for kind of retirement and insurance for our pastors, for our for entity employees, as what they're called. And so that's kind of the main difference between a Presbyterian polity and kind of Baptist associationism. There we go. I'll get it out.
Yeah, Mike, that's a great explanation. That's exactly right. The only thing I would add to it to help people understand, because people outside the Southern Baptist Convention that only have known hierarchical structures in denominations have a hard time understanding how ours is organized, especially when we use things like we have a president, or we have presidents of certain entities and this board and that board. It sounds very familiar to them in hierarchical sort of terminology, but it really isn't. But the other way to look at it, excuse me, is that every independent church is just that, independent. So they hire and fire their own ministerial staff. They set their own budgets. They own their own property. They decide their own ministries. In reality, even the Baptist Faith and Message, they can adhere to it strictly or ignore it altogether. In reality, so there's just nothing from the outside dictating anything at the local level. And the way we cooperate is with our dollars, most, I guess, pointedly. And there's some doctrinal affinity there, of course, with the Baptist Faith and Message. But even that gets strained at times because, again, at the local level, that may be a big deal to you or not at all. Just depends on the church. And I tell people all the time, you know, if you go to a Catholic church anywhere in the world on any given Sunday, you know exactly what you're going to get. You're going to get exactly the same thing. In a Baptist church, who knows? Every one of them can be different. And that speaks to that independent nature.
You mentioned the Baptist faith and message, and I know we've done a show, Mike, on that where we kind of went through it. But isn't it that the SBC, now, as you mentioned there, Pastor, that you could have more than just that as your maybe your doctrinal statement for your church? Mm-hmm. You know, like I'm a 1689 guy. So if I was a Southern Baptist 1689 guy, maybe we had that confession as our standard for our church. But all the churches within the SBC have to at least adhere to or agree with the Baptist faith and message, correct?
No.
It's
weird. Yeah. The local church, not really. It's strange. We're not a creedal people. Like we're, just people of the book, the Bible alone. And I love that. The Baptist faith and message, the only place where it must be endorsed is with the agencies and institutions that the churches support. So if you teach at a seminary or you're one of the missionaries that are paid by Southern Baptist or at one of our entities, then yes, you do have to subscribe to it essentially as a creed, that you agree to teach in accordance with it, not contrary to it. But at the local church level, that church could have the 63 confession, the 2000 confession. They could go by the 1689 confession. And that has nothing to do with their ability to cooperate with the Southern Baptist Convention. So it's kind of used in two different ways depending on where you're talking about.
Okay.
Now, there's the Southern Baptist Convention can choose not to accept your corporate dollars too if you don't teach within accordance of the Baptist faith and message. So here in Louisville, the St. Matthew's Baptist Church was a cooperating church, right, and has now been deemed no longer in good standing with the Southern Baptist. And so they can reject all the corporate money given to it. So there's that aspect. So, but then again, a lot of it is going to be pretty much if you endorse the gay agenda or you endorse women preachers, that's kind of the two ways the SBC says, well, no, you're no longer in friendly fellowship with us. Mm-hmm. But if you don't hold those two positions, then as Pastor Clint says, they're not going to kick you out and they're not going to do anything about it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. Cause that's one of those things I wasn't 100% on. I thought that everybody just had to agree with that at least, because it does seem kind of, as opposed to, again, being a 1689 guy, and I'll use that because I'm more familiar with that. It's a little more in depth of a confessional statement, so where the Baptist faith and message, it's a biblical statement. It's a wonderful statement, but it's a little more, what's the right word? Broad, to where you can encompass maybe where the 1689, you're going to have mostly particular Baptist, Reformed guys, where within the SBC, you've got Calvinistic individuals, preachers, but then you also don't have that. So the Baptist faith and message is a little more broader, to where you're going to agree on essentials, still be brothers and cooperate together for the sake of some of those things that we already mentioned, but to get out that bringing those dollars together to go out towards missions and certain things like that, and church planting and the many other different entities that you guys know more than I do. Because that was one of the things, and Pastor Darrell, you had mentioned this already, but that was one of the questions. My wife and I were talking about this earlier, and she said, is it kind of like if a church needs a pastor, that the Southern Baptist Convention would send someone to them, and you'd already addressed that. It's like, no, the churches have the autonomy to call or to fire a pastor that's within their congregation.
Right.
So, and I mean, it's not that, to kind of put it, I mean, the Southern Baptist Convention has tools for a congregation to find a pastor, but it's that difference than maybe like the Methodist, which appoints pastors for their churches. You know, kind of to that contrast. And I've heard similar people say the same thing about Southern Baptists, that they choose your pastors, like, you know, and it's that understanding of that balance between a church autonomy and then coming together that I think people tend to don't understand, because it seems like, as we mentioned earlier, it is hierarchical, but it's not, because we as Baptists prize autonomous churches.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's one of the, was you going to say something there?
Yeah, I was just going to say that flows from a Baptist distinctive, and Daryl, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it flows from a Baptist distinctive, which is the priesthood of all believers. Mm-hmm. Would you say that's right, Daryl?
I think congregationalism, which is where that sort of fierce independence comes from. I think it is connected to that idea of priesthood of all believers. I think you're right on that, but probably more so to just Baptists adopting that and being doggedly committed to a congregational polity and that kind of independence, that free church movement that they were part of in history. It may not be the defining characteristic, because probably, you know, believers' baptism by immersion is the defining characteristic, but I'd put the congregationalism and the independence right behind it. But I think you're right. I think it dovetails into that doctrine too.
Now, one of the things me and Mike were talking about after the program last week, when we were talking about possibly doing a show today on the Southern Baptist Convention of 2021, we were talking about how missions is funded together. These churches come together in the SBC, they pull their money together, and you're able to send missionaries out. And I don't know if this is the right term. I know, Pastor Daryl, you said you grew up in an IFB church as well. I don't know if it was considered deputations or candidating, where missionaries would go out and they would try to raise support. I don't remember if that the term was like a deputation. I can't remember. I'm not 100% on it. But they would go around from churches to churches trying to raise support. Right. And one of the things me and Mike were talking about at the after our program last week was that within the SBC, these missionaries can go into the field and they don't have to worry about trying to go around and raise this support. They can go out and do the mission, which it really is a great thing when you think about it. You don't have that extra stress or burden. I know my wife was telling me that she remembers, because she grew up in an IFB church as well, there was a family that for 3 years they were trying to raise support and never fully was able to raise support. The man still had to continue to work and never being able to get to the mission field. So when you think about what the SBC is doing there and accomplishing, is getting these missionaries out to the field so they can share the gospel, spread the good news, and not have to worry about that fund. It just sounds like a wonderful way of pooling the money. And that's really what they're trying to do, right? When they're coming together as a convention, as a entity, is to, as you guys already mentioned, put that money together so that these things can be accomplished. And missions being, I mean, one of the biggest things with Southern Baptist, right? Getting people out to the mission field.
Right. Yeah. International missions is, from the very beginning, from 1845 to now, is the very heartbeat of the Southern Baptist Convention, the cooperation that takes place. There are other causes as well, but typically the cooperative program money that comes in, that funding mechanism that was begun in 1925, half of it goes to international missions. The largest designated offering of the year during Christmas time, Lottie Moon Christmas offerings for international missions, is the largest mission Southern Baptists will take up all year long. So that's where the heart of most Southern Baptists are. is supporting that, getting the gospel to the nations through that wonderful, like you said, it's a blessing to have such a funding mechanism for those missionaries that are called out. They can go get trained at our seminaries at a fraction of the cost because of the money churches give. And then they can be fully funded on the field and not have to worry about raising that money. And it's great. I think that's what excites most. I know that's what excites folks in our church is seeing that happening. And one of the best things happening in our convention right now has been the revitalization, reinvigorating of the International Mission Board under Dr. Chitwood. There's no doubt. I know folks that are there. I know him personally. I know what kind of guy he is because I knew him in Kentucky. And, he's brought a really good morale back to the IMB after David Platt had been there and all of that had happened while he was there. And they're pointed in a really good direction. And, so they're doing some great stuff.
Yeah, I think that's, if you don't get anything from the podcast, I mean, that's, as you said, that's the thing. That's what kind of started the kind of cooperation before Southern Baptists was a thing. You had, the whole story with Lottie Moon and having even the split in between different particular Baptist churches on whether they should pool money together to send missionaries and not in early America. Really is. And I haven't watched the IMB's report from the convention yet this year, but I was doing the North American Mission Board, which is kind of the more local, and just what they're doing in plants and revitalization. 50% of all baptisms in Canada came from church plants, and just the growth there. Obviously we pray that these are solid churches, but just seeing, the impact in those ways. That is what's exciting about attending a Southern Baptist church and being able to be part of that in that way, and having those kind of connections that like my church couldn't do on our own. We do fund one missionary and give him a little bit, but we can't fully support him. And so that's what makes, allowing local churches to be part of the bigger mission of evangelism overseas, and, being able to connect with IMB missionaries too at the church level. So then they know, you can establish a relationship and even get closer. That was one thing in my missions class that I was taught, to be even more involved with that.
Now, with giving to a cooperative program, can you establish how you want that fund to go from your local church, or do you just give into the cooperative program and they kind of spread it out where they feel it's needed? Or how does that work?
There's two lanes of funding for our cooperative work. One is the cooperative program, where your church just gives to that pot of money, and then those who represent Southern Baptists, the executive committee of the Southern Baptist Convention, every year will work on those allocations and where they go, and that's one of the things that's approved by messengers each year. And then you give directly to designated offerings that your church would choose to take up through the year. And then those dollars go directly to those sources. So you have those really two different lanes. Now, any church can actually give directly to any organization or institution or board that they wanted to. So there's a variety of ways a church could choose to give.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to kind of explain that, it's not like the church just gives to the Southern Baptist. They do is they give to their most do. I mean, obviously you don't have to. Most will give to their state convention. So in Kentucky, we give to the Kentucky Baptist convention. they take 50%. Now each state's different. Kentucky, it's 50%, and then they send 50% to the national convention for the use of that. And so, that's probably the primarily means a lot of churches give to the cooperative program. And so you're not only supporting your local, your kind of state convention, which helps out a little bit closer. It's kind of the first place you can kind of go to before that money goes off to the national convention and then is allocated to the entities.
Right. That's an important first step that I completely missed. Yeah. And everyone goes to the state first. They take their piece and then on to the national organization.
All right. So now as we got a little bit of how the Southern Baptist life kind of works and the coming together for the sake of getting missionaries out there, and then some of the other entities that were out there. You have the ERLC, you've got the you mentioned one, Mike, that's like a retirement program.
Guidestone. It's the most exciting report of the annual meeting.
And then
that's a joke.
And then there's Lifeway, right? Lifeway's it's owned by the Southern Baptist Convention, correct? Or am I wrong on that? That's
Lifeway actually is its own entity. They don't receive any cooperative program money. They generate all their own revenue.
Okay.
Convention. They are what used to be the Baptist Sunday School Board of the Southern Baptist Convention. I'm old enough to remember that. You guys aren't. And but I don't know when they changed to Lifeway Christian Resources, maybe back in the 90s, early 90s, somewhere in there.
Okay.
They serve Southern Baptist, but they don't receive cooperative program money.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So now when we got some of that understanding down, we realize it's people I will identify as I'm a Southern Baptist, but it's not necessarily a top-down kind of it's a different kind of ecclesiology. It's congregational. It's still the autonomous. The local churches have that autonomy. So now let's get into some of the workings of the convention. Mike, you said it's like that's usually the only time there's a Southern Baptist is 2 days. I think you said they come together for a convention, and this is a yearly thing, correct?
Yep.
It's once a year, except last year was unable to because of the pandemic. So a yearly thing where they would come together and you elect a new president every year. Is it 1 year term, or how does that work?
It's a 1 year term. It's customary that a president gets a second term, typically unopposed, if he wants it. But then 2 years and that's it.
Okay.
Except in a pandemic, then you get 3.
Yeah, then you get 3. Yeah. So that comes together there, and then now, Mike, when you spoke to me the other day and said that, well, you was telling me you was unable to go, but you was going to be a messenger. That was the first time I ever heard the term messenger. I knew about resolutions because of 2019 when the big talk was Resolution 9, and then the other stuff that's come out of that there, but. Let's talk about some of those terms when they come together. These messengers come from church. I know, Mike, you said you was having 2 people sent from your church was going to go, you and another brother. Is that typically 2 people from each church go, or is it dependent on the size of the church? How does that work? And what is a messenger?
So a messenger is someone voted on by their church to represent them at the convention. So that's what a messenger is. So in my case, me and my fellow church member were brought up before the church. We were voted on to become messengers down. A lot of times it's pastors that go. You kind of will hear that in the questions. But so we were voted on by our church to represent our church to the convention, and I would have full voting rights. So anything that required a vote as a messenger, you can vote. And then it's kind of basically the entities giving a report like a business meeting. It's just a giant business meeting where the entities report what they're doing and how they're using the cooperative dollars. And then an opportunity for messengers to ask questions of the entities. And then you also have resolutions and that are voted on are kind of public statements that kind of have some force, but not really. It's kind of, I'm not as clear about. But yeah, so you come down and all these churches come together and yeah, basically try to make sure all the entities represent.
Every church.
Sorry, Clay.
Yeah, so if I'm correct, every church is eligible to have at least 2 messengers, depending on whether or not they give to a Southern Baptist, to either to the cooperative program or to a Southern Baptist entity or cause. You can have 2 messengers, and then depending on your, if you give more or if you have more members, you can have up to 11. So you have somewhere between 2 and 11 messengers. I think that's correct. Maybe
I think it's 12. Yeah, I think it's 12.
12. Okay.
Yeah, you're close. Yeah. And I think you can't have any more than 12, no matter how big you are. But yeah, it's based on your giving. Every church every year will do, at the end of the church calendar year, which is September to August, they fill out what they call an annual church profile, which is just lots of information about your church and your statistics, your giving, your attendance, all the things that Southern Baptists use to compile data on our churches. And according to your giving, then you will be assigned how many messengers you could send to the convention to represent your church.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to be a huge church to have 12. It doesn't take, you don't have to be huge, not a mega church. But everybody does get at least 2.
Okay.
Yeah.
Everybody that gives.
That gives. Yeah, exactly.
Now, as far as the resolutions go, is this people within these local churches that are submitting these resolutions and then it's overlooked by the committees? How does that work? Or are they coming up with certain resolutions and then asking the people that are there, the messengers, to vote on that?
Yes, both.
Both? Okay.
Both. Yeah, both and. Yeah. Messengers have the opportunity to submit resolutions on anything they want. It could be on any topic up to a certain cutoff date, so that a committee that's been elected by the messengers of the, or actually the committee I think is appointed.
Yeah, it's appointed by the president.
It's appointed by the president, this committee. And so they receive all those, they consider them, they can edit them if they want. They have the freedom to write their own if they want, based on other things that they got. So they have a lot of latitude for the finished product that they bring to the messengers when we get to the convention. Resolutions are funny. Resolutions, again, this is the quirkiness of Baptist life. Resolutions, we get really worked up about them one way or another. And then when we all leave, they mean absolutely nothing at your local church. Absolutely nothing. It's not like you have to go back to your church and teach that resolution or adhere to it or agree with it or anything. So it is. I mean, if we wouldn't get so upset about it, it'd be funny. But they do, for the messengers that gather at that convention, it's really like a confession. It's really more of a public statement to the world. Is really what it's about. Here's who we are. Here's what we think about this particular issue that we feel like we need to address together. But again, go back to the local church. Most of your people at your church, they don't have a clue. They don't even know there was a resolution or what it was about, unless you tell them about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
go ahead, Mike.
If I remember this right, they don't even have bearings on the entities. Like, it's not like, an entity has to follow a resolution.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of what makes it, kind of that public statement.
So then, as I'm thinking through this, and I was talking to Pastor Darrell about this before we came onto the program, excuse me, how after 2019, I began to see so many people say it's time to leave the SBC. And then even after this one, it's like, it's time to go. The SBC's lost. There's no point in trying to continue this. From what I'm hearing, these resolutions, again, because of the autonomy of that local church, really don't affect it. So they're important because obviously you want to stand and being something, as we mentioned, like the Southern Baptist Convention of 2021 was in the news media, the world news media. So this is something that's getting out there. So some of these topics that you're standing and saying, no, as a Southern Baptist Convention, as the largest Protestant group in the United States of America, we stand against CRT, or we stand against abortion, we stand against whatever the issues are that's being covered in the news. It's putting a definitive statement that this is what we stand for as Southern Baptists. So it is important, but it also maybe, and you guys can correct me if you think I'm wrong, is not something to be so hasty to just jump and say, that's it, it's over, it's a lost cause, let's move on.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah. And I've seen some of that too, ironically, from people who are not part of the Southern Baptist Convention, which kind of like, why do you care in one sense? But in a way, and you kind of see Founders Ministry doing this, and I don't, all opinions aside, kind of what they're going for is, out of kind of all of these religious groups, the Southern Baptists are really the only structured ecclesiology that allows for a conservative resurgence. Mm-hmm. And so there's an argument to be made that if you leave the Southern Baptist Convention, you're taking your voice with you. Mm-hmm. And a lot of these churches who are leaving, one question I would have is, are you actually being involved in a way that your voice is heard? Are you going to the conventions to, vote what you think is right before just jumping ship? Because the beauty of the Southern Baptist Convention is that while the president has a lot of power and appoints boards, that changes every 2 years. If it's a customary, if they really don't like him, if someone might run after 1 year, and you have those kind of the ability to change, where you don't have that in the PCUSA. Mm-hmm. The PCUSA is never going to turn back to a conservative view. It can't. And so I think there's an argument to be made that, leaving the Southern Baptist Church is really hurting them to steer correctly if you think they're going liberal.
Right.
And I mean, wouldn't it, because we know that there is sin in the world, we even as Christians still fight against the flesh that we still have that remains. Even if you left and started an association, down the road, there's going to be issues that come in that you're going to have to fight against. And, and maybe 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, however long it goes, there may be, like what we're seeing with so many other groups, like you mentioned, PCUSA, you have the United Methodist, that have gone to a degree that there really is no coming back from with that. But I mean, I just think that sometimes we can be too hasty in our decision making and jump ship. And rather than, Mike, like you was the first one that said this to me, you stay and you keep pressing on and keep, fighting that from the inside and seeking to make those changes. So speaking about that and speaking about the resolutions and how some of these things come about, is that how certain topics like critical race theory come to the table? It's something that's prominent in our society. I think it's been out there for a little while, but I think after George Floyd, we started to see more of it thrown out there and used. And then even within the Southern Baptist, you have people that are promoting certain, types of a theory, this theology, so to speak. And so is that how these resolutions come about, where people start saying, whoa, wait a minute, people are wanting to use CRT, now you want to speak against it, And that is one of the issues. I think that was when people were coming to this one, they were seeking to overturn something that happened in 2019.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Most Southern Baptists had no clue what critical race theory and intersectionality was before Birmingham in 2019. I wasn't at that convention. Watched some of it, but really had to do a lot of catch up after the fact. I didn't know what it was. It's just not an area that I would have been familiar with. So I spent the last 2 years educating myself, doing a lot of reading in it and trying to understand it, not just react to it. And I think you're right, Ricky, that what happened this year, especially after having a year off, and everybody, well, we couldn't go anywhere, so all I did was sit around and read about CRT, and and so a lot of us, including myself, we're concerned of, it's just a resolution, but behind the resolution, there's an intent, a motivation. So the question is, why in 2019 was there even a resolution that came to the floor of the convention that wanted to put a very positive spin on critical race theory, even subordinating it to scripture very clearly, but yet elevating it as a helpful tool sociologically that could be used to help us in matters of race and race reconciliation? Where was that coming from? What was that? For most people, it sounded very odd. They didn't understand it, didn't know what it was. I think there were a handful of people in the room that did know, who tried to push back on it, and they were effectively squashed. And so then we had 2 years to go to war on Twitter and to blog and to read and try to figure this mess out. And then, like you said, George Floyd happened. Black Lives Matter gained all this speed. And all of a sudden, the rhetoric of critical race theory is being spoken everywhere. So it had been in higher education since the late 80s, where it started, and has just kind of worked its way into broader culture in public schools, universities, colleges. And I think part of the fear was that we felt like in a couple of our seminaries, we were hearing some of this rhetoric. We were from a few people, and it was beginning to cause some concerns. Now, whether those things were blown out of proportion, I don't know. I saw the videos, I read a few things that were said, and it did sort of raise the eyebrows. Like, that sounds a little like this stuff, and talking about whiteness and white supremacy and privilege and all this rhetoric. So yeah, I think coming into this year's convention, there were a number of resolutions submitted to try to repudiate Resolution 9 in 2019 in a way of speaking to CRT and race and biblical sufficiency in a way that might give better clarity to the subject and bring a more biblical understanding of its incompatibility, I guess, in many people's minds, and that we needed to say that. So a number of resolutions was submitted. There was one that was sort of campaigned for. So the word got out, and over 1,300 people submitted the same resolution to try to, force the hand of the committee. You need to deal with this. And so what came out of the convention in regard to that one, in Resolution 2, many people fell kind of flat because it didn't really address it specifically, although the committee would claim it included it without actually naming it. So I don't think they made it better. I think they made it worse. They may have had good intentions, but I don't think it was the result they were looking for.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't it say something similar to like any theory is not?
The language was any theory or worldview. And then they qualified that, I think, in 3 different resolves of, and it was, and don't get me wrong, the resolution as it stands by itself is fine. There's nothing wrong with it. But when you read it, you kind of wonder, it's really vague. The title of it mentions race and racial reconciliation in the title. But then it gets very vague in the body of it, and you kind of are left wondering, why is it so vague? And everybody's got a theory on that, I guess.
Yeah.
And that was one, and then you had the one that Clay and his group brought up and was squashed in committee on the not just incrementalism but abolishing abortion, that then comes up and with a 2/3 vote is now something to also consider and added. So even the Committee on Resolutions can be overruled by the messengers. And so you saw that may not be exactly the resolution we all wanted, with the addition to not only, I think, was
Alone.
the addition alone. Yeah.
Clay, that was your resolution. You were a part of that?
Yes.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Yeah, it was a good resolution. Strongest statement certainly the Southern Baptists ever put forward on abortion, and the motion to amend it to put the word alone in there made your whole paragraph nonsensical.
Right.
And the messengers approved it, and I was sitting there shaking my head, going, "This doesn't make any sense now."
Yeah.
You never know what's going to happen.
Well, go ahead and speak on that some, Pastor Clay, because we agree with abolitionists. We've had you guys on the program before when you guys was putting forward some, one of these resolutions to try to, garner support for abolitionism on abortion in the SBC. And so you were there this year, as you told me earlier, not as a messenger, but you were there to try to support the others and pushing forward this resolution of abolishing abortion, making a stronger statement. Because when I watched a video clip from this one where the guy got up and it seemed he was offended that this is my opinion, because this is how I was viewing it, that he was offended that we're bringing an abolitionist statement when we've always been pro-life as a pro-life entity. And nobody's questioning that the SBC is, not pro-life, but saying, look, as a entity, as Christians, we can take a stronger stance against abortion. So maybe you want to walk us through some of what you was experiencing there when it comes to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that messengers were coming out in droves to the convention for this year was to speak to what they perceived as more of a hierarchical approach to our association. A lot of people in our convention felt like, our entity heads are functioning more like they have authority rather than that they are employed by the group. And, I really feel like that provided a fertile seedbed for what happened with our resolution. We motioned to bring our resolution out of committee, and to my knowledge, that has never happened. That has never happened, at least since '79, which is when Bill Askell, who brought the resolution forward to the floor, at least since he's been involved in the convention life. And so it's almost unheard of, if not unheard of, for that to happen. But like I said, I think the people wanted a stronger resolution on abortion than what the committee gave them. And it's particularly important that it was 50 years ago that the convention made a statement in a resolution, and this was 18 months before the Roe decision. They made a statement allowing for abortion in certain cases. And then in 74, after Roe, they came out and supported it again. And so, a lot of people, I think, wanted a stronger statement on abortion, if not the strongest statement we've ever had on abortion, as a way to kind of say, we are as far distance from where we were back in 1971 as we can possibly be. So me and a small group of people, we got together and we did our best to get our resolution out there in front of the people, so that it wouldn't be another critical race theory resolution 9 type thing where we're voting on something that we have no idea what it is. So a lot of people, thousands of people, had those resolutions in their hands when it was brought up from the floor to present for a 2/3 vote to bring it out of committee. And so they knew what we were talking about when we brought that up. So yeah, it was a very unique moment in Southern Baptist history.
So you guys was there a large amount of individuals handing out those resolutions for people to read. Is that how it works? Or is that how what was going down?
That's not how folks typically do it. And I think the SBC convention kind of saw us as a thorn in their side, didn't really want us there, didn't really want us doing that. And I can understand why, I can sympathize with that. But we really felt like it was important enough to kind of go against the norm. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it was a small group of us.
Yeah, I didn't get one of those. Were you passing those out on Tuesday?
We actually passed them out all day Monday, all day Tuesday, and then the morning on Wednesday.
Of course, in the Wednesday bulletin, it was in there.
Yes.
Because it was brought up as a motion on Tuesday, so that actually had to publish it in the bulletin that everybody picks up on Wednesday. So that was the first time I saw it. Yeah. Excellent.
All right, so we're coming down to about 8 minutes left in the program. Pastor Darrell, is there any other things that stood out with this convention, or anything you would want to speak on before we come to a close?
Yeah, I think the stuff that's going on in the Southern Baptist Convention right now is really not that complicated. There are a lot of points of tension right now, whether it's with mishandling of sexual abuse reports with the executive committee, questions about NAM's policies and things like that, or issues about women pastors and preachers, or CRT, all these things. The one thing they all have in common is in the last, or the ERLC, got that too, in the last 2 years particularly, but even beyond that, especially with the ERLC, probably the last 5 years, there's just been an erosion of trust. And with an organization like the Southern Baptist Convention, which is really an association, as Mike said earlier, it runs on trust. It can't work without trust. Churches trust that they're sending their money up and out to entities and leaders who have to be in place there to handle those monies, use those monies wisely, be good stewards, practice good practices, have good sound doctrine in the seminaries. It's all a matter of trust. And when things begin to happen that either rightly or wrongly erode that trust, then this is what we see beginning to happen. So right now is an opportunity in our convention. And I hope what Clay said was really important. The messengers put the convention leaders on notice in several different times in that convention. They pushed back against certain things that normally would just been rubber stamped. People came to that convention informed. They'd read the book of reports, which never happens. They actually read it and looked at stuff and were informed and pushed back on a variety of things. And those leaders now have to respond. So really the messengers put the ball in their court. And now they've got to work to build trust. And there's some work to be done there. And so over the next year, I hope that's what they do. I hope that's what they commit themselves to do, where they need to do that, because they have that opportunity now. And Southern Baptists are gracious people. I believe that. And I believe we want good things to cooperate to do the great things and for the Great Commission. And I'm more of, that's what I'll tell my church. Sky's not falling. It's not unraveling. We got problems. We got some issues. We got to work through them. Let's see what our leaders do now, how they respond. And we'll see where we are a year from now. And then we'll go from there. Because things can always change. It's always a moving thing in the Southern Baptist Convention. But I tell you one thing, biggest crowd we've had in 25 years. There's if some people were asleep, they're not asleep now.
Wasn't it like 16,000 or something? Or more over?
15,726 showed up.
Wow.
So yeah, good sized crowd, and that was very healthy in and of itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was. I think it was the first time I heard the president tell people to like scoot in, because like you have to be in the room to vote.
Right.
And so like there were messengers out in the hall because they couldn't sit. There weren't seats, and so I think that, yeah, hopefully, you'll have the same out in, I think, Anaheim next year. Yeah, and I think that's the important part is the messengers do have a voice.
Mm-hmm.
I think, the entities were kind of awoken maybe a little bit.
Don't use woke.
I said awoken.
I know.
A little bit, and even I may have not have voted for the current president of the SBC. There's still you don't know what he's going to do, and you hope and just to pray that he does make the wise decisions. Because I think I kind of got involved with Southern Baptist politics. I had just got accepted for Southern, was about to leave. I was in a Southern Baptist church, and the traditional statement came out. So this would have been 2012. And that was kind of the fault line, for lack of better words, of the Southern Baptist Convention at the time. I think you kind of see it changed. And I think a lot of people have recognized Southern Baptist has multiple issues now. It's just not this theological one.
Mm-hmm.
There are some more pragmatic, with the sexual abuse scandal from a couple years ago with the Houston Chronicle report coming out. And I think it's a time that Southern Baptists need to get involved, as I mentioned earlier, not to jettison, but maybe to quote that we saw on Twitter and the New York Times, to take the ship and to go ahead and, be the voice that stands on the authority of Scripture and holds to what we confess as a convention and hold them to it.
And Pastor Clay, is there anything you'd like to say before we close out the program tonight?
I would just ask our brothers and sisters to pray for the Southern Baptist Convention, pray for Southern Baptist churches, pray for Southern Baptist leaders. We definitely need it. I know our small group just really saw the hand of God, the blessing of God at the SBC, and I hope other people were blessed as well to see the hand of God moving and answer to specific prayers. Even if things didn't go exactly the way you wanted, we could not deny that God was answering prayers and moving. And so just keep praying and keep pressing forward.
Amen.
Yeah. Amen. And we do serve a sovereign Lord, and he's in control of all things, and we can continue to trust in him. No matter where the culture goes, no matter where certain denominations may head, he is still controlling. He still has his church. And we are just called to be faithful in the preaching of his word. And so I want to thank you both of you brothers for coming on the program tonight. Me and Mike talked about this show, and he says, I don't know how many people is going to want to know about the Southern Baptist Convention, the polity and all that. And for me, I was very, interested in this because, again, as someone, and I'm looking at it from the view of there's many people that probably don't understand the inner workings of it and what is going on. And I think it's very helpful to have a program. I've watched a few where people were just very critical and criticizing certain things that are going on. And again, like I said, wanting to jump ship. But I think as, a former co-host that we used to have on the program, we got to stay balanced in everything that we do. You got to stay balanced. And so you don't want to just jump this way to the right or to the left. You want to kind of, walk that aisle and just, stay focused, stay balanced, and stay faithful to the call that God has given us. And so I want to thank you again for coming on the program and sharing with us the inner workings of the SBC and what happened this year in 2021. So thank you both.
Thank you, brothers. Blessings to you.
That's been G220 Radio for tonight. Hope you enjoyed the program. You can reach out to us at g220radio@gmail.com. Again, that's g220radio@gmail.com. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, email us there. Attention, Mike Miller, and he will get back to you. So that's G220 Radio. Until next week, God bless.